I don't remember who said it, but I think it was a Greek philosopher who one time said, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Um, well, that was certainly probably a little stronger than I would describe the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union during World War II. But as long as they had a common enemy in Nazi Germany and then later Imperial Japan, they could at least put their differences aside long enough not to shoot at each other. But as soon as the war was over, um, that relationship between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, it fell apart really, really fast. Now, first of all, this was never a great relationship to begin with. Stalin thought that Truman was an idiot, and the military hierarchy in the Soviet Union thought Americans were a bunch of ignorant cowboys, and the Americans hierarchy in the military thought that the Russians were a bunch of barbarians, and they were brutal, and so there was certainly no love lost there. But excuse me. But certainly after the war, their relationship fell apart very, very quickly. In fact, I don't even think that the bullets were not flying before the relationship really starts to fall apart. And it starts at the Yalta Conference. The Yalta Conference is a conference where they're trying to decide what to do with Eastern Europe and post-war Europe. They are determined that they are going to win. They know they're going to win, but they got to figure out what are we going to do with Europe afterwards. And Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Army, the Red Army occupies most of Eastern Europe, says, we're not giving it up, and there's really nothing you can do about it. We have battle-hardened soldiers in Eastern Europe, and you guys are tired, we're tired, but are you really willing to fight us for it? And the answer was, well, no, we're really not. And so after the war, Russia is occupying Eastern Europe. Now, this is very different than what the United States. The United States comes in, and of course, they've occupied the western part of Germany. They've liberated France and Belgium and Holland and the Low Countries and what have you, right? And then they give those countries back to the countries that they were before. The United States is not going to establish a military presence in France, where we're going to make sure we only have friendly governments and that sort of thing. In Germany, we're going to take Germany and put it back together at some point, and we're going to cut it into zones first to administer it, and then after a couple of years, we're going to put three zones together and form the Federal Republic of Germany, which is going to govern itself. Soviet Union, not so keen on that. As Joseph Stalin said that in his lifetime, he had fought the Germans 3 times on Russian soil, and there would never be a fourth. And he was telling the truth. During World War I, he was alive when the Germans invaded Russia, much to the disaster of the Germans. And then he was also alive when the Germans invaded Archangel. The United States, by the way, was also one of the countries that invaded Archangel, which did not work out so well for us or for Germany. And then, of course, the Operation Barbarossa, where Hitler ordered the invasion of Russia during World War II, and that doesn't work out so well for them either. So, by the way, if you don't learn anything else from this class, remember this: do not invade Russia. Okay, because people who invade Russia always lose, except for the Mongol Empire, and that was like the 12th century. So, don't invade Russia. Anyway, and so Stalin wanted to establish these protective zones between Russia and Germany, and so he establishes Poland as basically being a satellite state of Russia. The Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, as being satellite states. They are going to control the government, they're going to control the military, they're going to control the police, so that if Germany ever decides to invade Russia, or anybody else from the West decides to try to invade Russia, they have to go through all these layers before they can get to Russian soil. And that gives the Russians an opportunity then to meet them on someone else's ground, Ukrainian ground or Polish or Czechoslovakian or Hungarian or whatever. All right. And the other thing they're going to do in this territory is they are going to extract reparations from Germany. Then, even though not like an official treaty of Versailles sort of way, but they would actually disassemble factories, German factories, put them on rail cars and send them back to Russia, put them back together way beyond the border, and that's how they started rebuilding their industry, is by disassembling German industry. Whereas here it is, the United States, we're like, and going, hey, whoa, we're going to rebuild Europe, and over here you're taking it apart. And that was just one difference. Other differences that are going to come out are going to be differences in economics. The United States and the Western powers are primarily capitalists, or they're where individuals get to largely decide what they want to do with their money. Of course, we have to pay taxes, and we don't get to decide about that. And some things you're not allowed to buy because they're illegal, or some things they're not allowed to buy because they're just not available in your town. But for the most part, we have a lot of freedom of what we can do with our money. But we also have a lot of risk that come with that as well. Soviet Union, they took away that economic freedom and it became a command economy. You were oftentimes factories, instead of producing what they thought was best, whatever would make the most profit or whatever was important to them, maybe the common public good, whatever it was, but them making the choice of what they were going to produce. And in a command economy, the government comes in and says, this factory will produce engine blocks for trucks. Well, maybe there's not a real demand for that, but it doesn't matter because that's what you've been told to do, and so you have no choice but to do that. And so there's some differences there. We wanted free elections. We wanted democracies, democratic republics. We wanted freedom of the press, freedom of speech. Soviet Union, Stalin was pretty much the exact opposite in all of those things. Elections were dangerous because you could get somebody who's not friendly to your party position. You had to control the press, and as part of that, you also have to control academics, what they're allowed to teach in schools, what they're allowed to, who's allowed to teach. So in order to maintain, because in the Soviet Union, as in many socialist regimes, it's all about collectivism. The society, the collection, or the community is the most important thing as represented by the state, whereas in the West, they were much more individualistic, and the individual rights were much more important than community good. And you can make a lot of arguments, and I'm not going to get into them on these videos about which system is best, but I will say that the Soviet Union system and the American system did not make for friendly relations. And so they didn't want to get into a war, though. They had just come out of World War II, 50 million people dead, probably more. Massive upheaval. You had refugees fleeing countries. It was a humanitarian crisis. It was an economic crisis. It was a military crisis still. Everything was a mess. And they didn't want these two countries that come out of the war still powerful. They didn't want to go to war with each other. They were tired. They realized perhaps that neither one could win. And this became especially true after the Soviet Union stole and then developed their own atomic weapons. Yeah, that's right. They stole them from the United States through spies working at Los Alamos. They stole the plans, got them to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union built their model, their bomb based on the Little Boy model, which was the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. And now all of a sudden we have these two nuclear powers. And they started throwing around a phrase called mutually assured destruction, or MAD. And so it was an interesting thing. This is going to lead to what we call a Cold War. Both powers, they don't like each other. They want to win the overall battle of ideas and ideals, these ideological battles. But because they both have control of the ultimate weapon, they dare not go to war with each other. And so instead, they fight through proxies. And you're going to see this, for example, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Latin America, in Africa, in Eastern Europe, where the United States is going to kind of sponsor one group of people that we like, sort of, and they're going to sponsor a group of people that they like-ish, and those two groups are going to go to fight with each other. And we're just going to supply advisors and materials and supplies, and then in terms, it's going to continually to escalate. If you really want to get a good sense of what the Cold War was like, actually, you watch Star Trek. You know me, I love my science fiction. There's a Star Trek episode called Private Little War, and I may put the link to it in here. I really recommend because it's a good one to understand the mentality of the Cold War, where you have these two great powers, and then on this country, this one planet, you have these people that are fighting with each other, and so each power chooses to sponsor one of the sides, and the wars just continue to escalate and go on. But the two powers can say, "But we're not at war with each other. It's them, not us," and plausible deniability. But again, neither side really wants to go to war with the other, because if they do, we have this mutually assured destruction, MAD, that's standing in the way. Nevertheless, the Cold War is going to be our longest conflict at just over 45 years. It is going to lead, somebody once said it's the only war where people never died. Well, that's not true. A lot of people did die. Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Afghanistan. I could go on with hundreds of different little skirmishes that cost American or Vietnamese or Korean or Russian or Chinese, or life is life. And so there was still a lot of people dying. It's just the United States and the Soviet Union weren't directly in conflict with each other. I'll probably do another video in a second, talk about the different places that they fought that were kind of not necessarily where you think war is going to be fought. But this is where it starts. Actually, it starts because the enemy of my enemy is sort of my friend, maybe.